not surprisingly, we call people busts. Maybe it's your favorite player. Maybe it's someone you already drafted or whatever. You know, I get it that it makes a lot of sense. Now, to define what a bust is, though, because every year we get flamed and people misunderstand what we mean by bust. We're not saying that this person or this player that we name is going to be terrible. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that they're just going too high for their ADP, and more likely than not, you can probably get better value there than this player. So normally we tend to stick in the top 100 ADP for these players. You might have someone a little bit later. I don't have anyone after 80 actually in this episode, but these are just guys to me that aren't going to live up to their ADP, and you can do better. And this is not all encompassing. There are other players that are going to be busts. These are just ones that stand out to me. And of course, like I've said before on this episode, there is a case where sometimes a player I mentioned may not be in the bust category or the bust kind of designation for your specific league type. You might have a league setup where it functions for the person. But that being said, we're using standard Yahoo Cats for the most part here, looking at that and trying to establish, okay, what, and pivoting around that, right? Where does someone gain or lose value? But for the most part, these are people that I think at the end of the day, given their ADP, are just way too high. Now, last thing before we get started here, if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe and throw the video a thumbs up, which helps a lot, and that also helps on future videos. And during the season, for those that don't know, we do 3 episodes a week as well as a few bonus episodes. So you'll want to turn on notifications to know when we drop our week previews, our unsustainable episodes, so that you're picking up the right players before everybody else. And if you're listening to us on a podcast provider, if they have reviews, please leave us a review. It helps out a ton. It's the thing that helps out the podcast the most, aside from subscribing, turning on notifications, or giving a thumbs up on YouTube. So, that being said, I talk a lot. I'm really sorry. I do have a co-host. There is someone else on this podcast, by the way. So I'm going to let him talk now and start this off.
Sure. So just like in the Sleepers episode, if you already saw that, or if you haven't, the way we're going to organize this is by going by forwards, then defensemen, then goalies. Don't expect as many, just by the nature of this. You know, we're kind of working in the reverse of the way you think about the Sleepers episode, in that we're only taking people that are high ADP, just to call them, you know, out of overvalued, I guess. You know, really overvalued is probably the correct name for this, but that doesn't really sound good.
It doesn't make,
bust is the right word, unfortunately.
It doesn't make too much sense, because this isn't like a cap league or anything like that. And so I can see it being a little bit deceptive, whereas I think bust is, to an extent, the right word for a guy that gets drafted super high and ends up as a later round value.
Yeah. So my first one here, and this actually, I had him here before the Kucherov news, is Braden Point at 13.8.
I have him as well.
I mean, you're talking about a guy that is at the beginning of the second now. He's competing with guys like Patrick Kane, who's just flat a better option, and going ahead of guys like Brad Marchand by a fairly significant margin. A lot of players in that area that I would have over Point. I'm really wouldn't even be considering Point personally in a standard Yahoo Cats league, which I think is the most common type, until probably the end of the second, beginning of the third, maybe. And that's a pretty significant difference in ADP.
Yeah. I mean, you're
talking like double.
I would take Stammer over him if we're looking at Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah, I would
players
too.
That we'd want. I mean,
especially now without Kucherov, like who's shooting? Yeah. Stammer is going to be the guy to pick up the slack if anybody is.
So it'll be interesting. I just don't think he lives up to the ADP. I don't think he's a bad player again, right? But I don't think he's worth that 13.9. I think you can do better at that position than Braden Point.
He can go point per game, and he still wouldn't be worth it because he doesn't do enough else.
True.
That's kind of the position he's in. And actually, I feel like a couple of the top players I have in my bust list fit that description.
You know, the year before last year, we had Connor McDavid on this list for pretty much the same reason. And people got all up in arms because he was everyone was picking up consensus #1 overall. Not last year, the year before that. Maybe we had him last year too, though. But the thing is, when you look at a guy like Connor McDavid, well, the issue is when you're in a bangers league, he used to lose a lot of value because he didn't shoot as much. He didn't get power play points. I mean, he doesn't hit. So what did he do? He got you points, and that was it. But when you're in a Cats league, you're trying to round out everything and be pretty balanced. And so it's hard to ignore an Ovi or a McKinnon or these guys, or Brent Burns back in the day, who got you just so many other peripherals and wasn't a center as well, you know? So I think Braden Point kind of falls into that same realm where, like, especially for Cats, there's just not enough there to justify that high of a price when there's other guys out there. Now, my first one here might be a little bit contentious because I've put it out there, just kind of floated it, and I've both heard people say they agree with me, and I've also heard some people say no. And that's Artemi Panarin. He's going at 5.9 last when I wrote this, at least.
Feels similar.
That's just...
It's 6.0 now, but I mean, that's splitting hairs, really.
That just feels so... It's not that I'm a Rangers fan. It's not that I'm not a believer in Artemi Panarin. It's that I don't think he is in the caliber of the McKinnons, the Ovechkins, the Patrick Kanes, and whatnot. He had a good season with the Rangers. Sure. But the Rangers as a whole were incredibly lucky. I mean, you're looking at Tony DeAngelo with his insane shooting percentage, a lot of that coming on the power play. The power play in general was insane. I don't know. And on top of that, I would argue that the Rangers got a little bit deeper this year. So they hopefully can spread out the offense a little bit instead of just relying on Zibanejad and Panarin to do everything. Hopefully you have Laugh coming in. Hopefully Buchnevich can step up. Maybe Chris Kreider can provide some depth. That's what you're kind of hoping for if the Rangers want to take another step forward. You can't just rely on those guys all the time. So I do see Artemi Panarin taking a step back and probably falling more into, the middle to late second round to third round value. I think somewhere around there is more where I take Artemi Panarin. I just don't see him as a top 10 pick, personally.
We should also consider, we talked about the Canadian division quite a bit in the Sleepers episode. I feel like the Metro, actually, I don't even know what they call it. Is it still the Metro?
I don't know what it's called. It's something with all the
that
Metro
division
teams.
is essentially the opposite of the Canadian division. There's almost every team there is reasonably defensively sound, and to be able to expect a huge point totals from anybody on basically any team is a bit much. Like the only guy I would consider pretty likely to be on, if it were an 82 game season, like around 100-point pace, is Brad Marchand.
Yeah.
I don't really see anybody else in the entire division getting close to that, and that's basically what you're saying Panarin's going to do if you take him that
exactly
early.
Like you're hoping for that, and I just don't. I get the upside, I really do, but I think he had a ridiculous season that I think he can still have an amazing season, but I don't think he sniffs his incredible season from last year. I'd love to be proven wrong. I'd love to be wrong. Do I want to gamble on that?
I would love for you not to be proven wrong. I want the Rangers to be horrible.
I want to gamble on that? 5th overall? 6th overall? No. I don't want to gamble on hopefully Artemi Panarin has a season like he did last year at around 6th overall. That's just not something I'm willing to do.
I think that's going to be kind of a theme, and we've talked about it in the draft strategies episode of you don't want to be taking risks with your top picks. It's just not worth it. A solid floor is better than a very high ceiling when you're talking this high. And despite Panarin's high ceiling, his floor is also, even though his floor is high compared to the league as a whole or the rest of who you draft in fantasy, it's not high compared to the other first round contending players. Speaking of, my next one here at 22 ADP is Andrei Svechnikov. I feel like this was surprising to a lot of people, which I find interesting. Now, I mean, he checks a lot of boxes of players I like, right? Like, I love multi-cat players, big shooters and all that. And, he's got that. He's not the biggest hitter in the world, but, he's clearly modeling his game after Ovi a little bit. And there's a lot to like, but we are talking about a player that's never even been point per game, that it's hard to really gauge what we're going to see this season. We saw a lot of shuffling around on the power play in Carolina last season. We saw a lot of shuffling around of lines. He wasn't playing with Aho for a fairly good stretch of time. So basically for me to think he's worth late second, early third value, which is what his ADP is telling me, I would have to basically be guaranteed he's not going to lose top line. He's not going to lose his minutes, and he's not going to lose top power play. And I don't feel at all guaranteed in any of those. So he's the player that could be worth it. He legitimately could end of the season, and I could just be wrong here. But I see his floor being pretty scary, actually. Like way lower than Panarin's, but of course we're talking about a player being taken later. But definitely too much of a concern for me to take that early. A player that I'm probably not going to like seeing other teams have, but I'll feel good about who I got instead.
Svech's meteoric rise, along with Artemi Panarin's, reminds me a little bit of Laine, right? He had that incredible season.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone expects them to break out into the superstar, and they take him about 2 or 3 rounds ahead of where they should go. For example, Artemi Panarin in our league, in our main league, which is a $50 buy-in, it has goals, assists, PIMs, power play points, shots on goal, hits, and blocks. Panarin finished 21st overall. Okay.
And that's with like an
And
amazing
that's with
season
a
for him.
Hart candidate season. So in my league, would people, and this is what you should do too, with a lot of these bust guys, what I would recommend is go back and look at where they were. What can Artemi Panarin realistically do on the Rangers this season better than last year to rocket him from 21st overall in our league to 5th? That's the question you've got to be asking yourself with all these busts, is going back and looking and saying, what can they do better to even get to this position? And so I just wanted to go back really quick here and actually read off the top 10 players that are going and give you an idea. And then this actually leads into my next one here. First overall, Nikita Kucherov. I mean, that kind of makes sense. He's going to fall, obviously, in the rank. So there's one spot that essentially goes out the window, right? We have Connor McDavid, Nathan McKinnon, Leon Draisaitl, then goes Artemi Panarin, then Ovi. Is Artemi Panarin worth more than Ovi? I don't know. Austin Matthews. Is he worth more than Austin Matthews? Nope. Then Andrei Vasilevsky. I don't know if you want to take it.
That's debatable. It depends on the league, but probably not in standard.
Probably not in standard, but whatever. I would actually still probably take Vasilevsky. And then you have Patrick Kane, Jack Eichel, Victor Hedman, Sebastian Aho, Braden Point, Mikko Rantanen, Sidney Crosby, Elias Pettersson. Some questionable ones up there in general, but nonetheless.
There definitely are.
But nonetheless, I don't see Artemi Panarin as being a 6th overall pick. I just can't.
Nope.
My next guy here is Mikko Rantanen at 15.8 on the Colorado Avalanche. So I feel like we're doing this again. Last season, he didn't have that great of a year. He was really underwhelming, and it's actually surprising to me to see him increase in ADP from last season. He really did not have that great of a season last year. He ended up getting split up from... He had a pretty good season. Okay, let me correct myself. He had a good season, but nothing to me that stands out as like 15th overall.
Yeah, it was fine.
He was fine. He was good.
It's like point per game and like whatever
shots.
Like, it wasn't eye popping really. Yeah.
So that's kind of where when I look at Mikko Rantanen, and last season he got split up at times from McKinnon. Clearly they were trying to not rely on him. His minutes dropped at one point. His shots on goal really weren't that great. There was a lot of he took the foot off the gas pedal in a way, not purposefully, obviously, but just because of the situation he was in. A lot of things changed around him, causing him to kind of not be as good. That scares me. Again, it goes into this idea of risk, right? That scares me that can happen to him. For that reason alone, I don't want him at 15. I'd rather have Blake Wheeler at 15. That would be a little bit of a stretch, but I'd rather have him.
But
so that's actually, that wouldn't be that much of a stretch in our league, at least, where we count hits, even in standard leagues. With
PIMs,
hits,
because he does get some PIMs.
So, to me, Mikko Rantanen at 15 is another one of those guys that, look, yes, he has all the potential in the world, but when you're telling me I need to pick at 16 to get him, I don't like that. I want him later than that, and if he's going at that range, I'm happy to miss out.
Yep. My next one here is Mark Stone. Now,
I have him too.
I feel like there's going to be some groans immediately, but the thing is, I think like overnight, I really think this offseason, everybody started posting the same articles, the same tweets about how Mark Stone is like the best player in the world, which sure, like I don't really have enough to refute that. And I wouldn't intentionally do it anyway. You know, he clearly is a very good two-way player, and it's rare for a two-way player to be able to be as offensive and as good of a sniper as Mark Stone is. He's excellent, but we're talking about fantasy here. At 30.2, you know, you're talking about like end of the third round or mid third round in 12-person leagues, and end of the third, beginning of the fourth in 10-person leagues. For a guy that doesn't really put up anything on the peripheral side, usually doesn't have crazy power play points, and is a good point getter, but that's it. That player doesn't go that high to me. Really, I think he should be probably down in like the end of the fourth, beginning of the fifth in most leagues, which is, you know, something like a 25%, 30% drop from where he is right now. I just think at a similar level, there are other players that you could get that I would much rather take on my team personally.
Yeah, I'd agree with that one. Now, my next one here is going to be Teuvo Teravainen.
A couple of examples, by the way, just to quickly interject. Yep. Mark Stone's at 30.4, yeah? We've got Steven Stamkos is 26.3, Brad Marchand's 27.6, There's Barkov, which I think is a little bit too
little too
early,
high.
actually. Malkin is 29.5. Gensel is 31.3. Tavares is 33.5. Scheifele is 34.9. Matthew Tkachuk is 38.6. I think I would have literally every one of those players over Mark Stone. In fact, I would have every one of those players over Mark Stone. Patrick Laine, 34.8. All of them.
Yeah.
Every single one I would have over Mark Stone.
I agree. I think Mark Stone, I had him on my list for the same exact reason. I just don't see him being worth 30. I see him as a really good real-life player, incredible real-life player, but for fantasy, like you said, I think there's too much that people are trying to translate all those articles and everything that was talked about Mark Stone being this incredible player in real life to somehow translating to fantasy, and I just don't see it. I mean, yes, he can be good. Is he 30 overall good? No, not to me.
The funny thing is, I mean, I don't want to spend too much more time on Mark Stone because I think there's lots to talk about, but I remember him being on our Sleepers episode way back when, maybe 3 years ago. He's still in Ottawa, and I brought him up because he was basically going undrafted despite the fact he had nearly a point per game season the year prior. Nobody cared or knew about him. And even last season, I mean, he was a pretty late grab. You get him in like the 8th or 9th if memory serves. And he was the same player that he is now. It's not like he had a crazy season. He's been doing the same thing for a while now.
He was essentially our Dylan
so
Larkin.
I really don't understand.
He was
that?
essentially our Dylan Larkin back then.
Yeah. It was weird.
It was very weird.
I remember he was like a waiver material the first time he got close to point.
And yet he was incredible. It was so strange.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so for me, for Mark Stone, I kind of see him, I agree with you, kind of 30% down, so probably more. If he's going 30 right now, I think I see him, honestly, I'd probably want him more around the 50s to 60s.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there feels good. I think 50s feels good if you think he's going to have a good season. If you think he's going to be similar to last year, around 60s makes sense to me. And also, it's weird to me that Mark Stone's going to 30, and yet Marchessault is at 122.
What is
Why?
happening? I don't
So
understand.
that's another thing, right? Like, if you want in on Vegas, go later. Go get Marchessault instead. Anyways, my next guy here is Teuvo Teravainen. I actually don't understand why he's going so high at 40.5. I think he's worth half that. I think he's more like an 80 pick around there. I don't understand.
It's all points. I feel like this season, for some reason, points have been extremely heavily weighted.
I think
in Yahoo's pre-draft rankings.
Yeah, it's weird, and I don't understand why exactly people are taking. I get people like points. That's fine, but again, I think that when you're looking at standard Yahoo cats, at least, like Teuvo doesn't really check a lot of boxes. I mean, hell, even for points, if I'm looking at my points league that counts hits and shots and everything, I don't like Teuvo that much. I don't like him at 40.5 much. So I don't see it. Like I said, I think more around the 80-ish range is where I'm seeing Teuvo go. It feels pretty egregious. And to me, I'm trying to remember who I was talking about. I think Teuvo to me reminds me a little bit of Konechny, reminds me a little bit of I remember there's another guy on my sleeper. I can't remember the name of him. But Teuvo just to me, or Elias Lindholm, I think is another comparable. Like, there are comparables, in my opinion, to Teuvo that are going much later. And so if you're looking for the makeup that Teuvo has, I think you can find that later on instead of gambling at 40.
Yeah, I'd agree. My next one is Brock Besser. This one really surprised
I agree.
me.
I'm hard.
52.3, that is super early. I mean, that's like beginning of the 6th round. That's in the beginning of the 5th round for a 12 person. Man, I really don't know what to even say here. I don't know what he's doing being anywhere near this. There's a big overreaction to Foley being shipped off. I get there's going to be scoring in the Canadian division, and that's funsies, and he's going to have a better season than last season, probably. But, geez.
People remember he was
like, that's
terrible
really
last year,
early.
right? Like,
yeah.
have people just
I
forgotten?
I mean, JT Miller is right next to his ADP.
Yeah.
It's like 50 to 52. Just take JT Miller. Why would you not?
I'd take JT Miller. I mean, it perplexes me because I remember last year people messaging us constantly with, like, why is Brock Besser so terrible? I need to drop Brock Besser. What do I do? What do I do? Brock Besser sucks. And then he comes out this season and is that ADP. It makes no sense. He was awful last season. His minutes dipped.
He's another player that everybody around him I would take above him.
It doesn't make any sense.
Taylor Hall, 53.4, easily take that above Brock Besser. I wouldn't even have to think about it.
He was on the chopping block this offseason. Apparently, the rumors are that he was on the chopping block. It was between him and Toffoli. If I hear that about a player, I'm not feeling good. It's the same with Oliver Ekman-Larsson. That's not making me feel good.
Yep.
And aside from that, I mean, you shouldn't overreact to news like that. But at the end of the day, to me, it's saying, okay, Vancouver doesn't have that much confidence in Brock Besser anymore. I agree with you. He was the last one on my list, and to me, he was probably one of the most egregious ones that are going based on name value, almost essentially alone. He has nothing to justify right now that ADP, nothing except Toffoli getting shipped off, and even then, I don't like it. He was dipping, and he was playing terrible even before Toffoli got to Vancouver.
Yep.
And I have no more.
I've got a couple more.
Take yours.
Actually, I have 3 more, and one of them I think is pretty important to be on this list. And that's Evgeny Kuznetsov at 63.4. Another one I really don't understand. He's coming off of a down year where we saw him shuffle around the lines with Backstrom taking the top center spot for a while and all this. Where is the upside here? He had 52 points in 63 games last season. He shoots twice a game, which is bad. He had 12 power play points. It's just nothing there is good. And he's going to be in a division that's going to be harder because he's going to be playing, like I mentioned before, a lot of really solid defensive teams. There's no reason he should be going this high. I mean, you compare him to other centers in his range here at 63.8, right? Let's just look past him. 70.2, Ryan O'Reilly. I would much rather have Ryan O'Reilly. 72.2, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. I would have him. 72.6, Sean Couturier.
Have him.
I would have Sean Couturier. 72.7, Barzal. I'm actually confused about that one as well.
Konechny,
and then
still
you've
down
got
there. Monahan, Jonathan Taves, all the guys we mentioned on Sleepers.
A bunch
of
Marchessault, Logan Couture. Like, there's a bunch of decent options in that area.
A center pick on Evgeny Kuznetsov when there's so many good sleepers.
I to be completely honest, his ADP is 63.8. I could see him going undrafted in some ways. It's crazy.
He finished in our league last year. He finished 184.
Yeah, that's undrafted. Yeah. Basically, that's past draft range. So it's, I mean, I assume somebody will take him, but he's going to fall. He's going to be I would wager he's going to be the farthest faller, or one of them at least, in our league.
Yeah.
Okay, next up, Kevin Fiala, 82.8. I think he actually might have been on your sleeper list.
I do like him.
I think the concern I have with Fiala is we're basically deciding he's like really good now on like half a season of good play. I get that he's getting an opportunity in Minnesota. The upside's there, but you're talking about somebody who's getting taken in like the 7th round, and that in 12-person leagues, and that feels a little rich to me. I mean, even last season, he played the whole season with Minnesota. I know that he picked it up in the back half of the season, but he only had 54 points in 64 games. So you are gambling with him. His shots are decent. He doesn't have any other peripherals really to speak of, but there is upside there, I will admit. But I'm not really. I'm not really willing to take a stab on a guy like Fiala that isn't quite proven enough in the 7th round. I feel like there's better options surrounding him as well. But I mean, he's not the worst one on this list as far as being incorrectly valued. The next one, this one's getting pretty low for the purposes of this episode. But Jacob Vrana at 97.4, like, why is he above some of the guys we mentioned over and over, like Pacioretty, or even like guys like Anthony Mantha and Kubalik and some of these other players that had breakout seasons last season? Why is Vrana so high up there? He had 52 points in 69 games. That's nothing special. He had 12 power play points. That's nothing special. 187 shots is a good direction. His shots have been increasing season over season. It's what you want to see. The guy plays 14 minutes a game. He had 0 points in 8 games in the playoffs.
Wasn't there a player last year that was the same as this, where he was playing 14 minutes a game, everyone was drafting him like crazy, and we were like, why in the world are people touching him? I don't remember who it was, but there was and
maybe in Burakovsky.
There was someone last year that was like that, where they were...
LeBanc. It was LeBanc.
Oh, it was LeBanc, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. I'm barely...
He did nothing.
Yeah, he did nothing. He was trash.
Well, he also got hurt, I think.
He still did nothing.
Yeah. Verano's confusing. Anyway, I'm out of forwards.
Okay.
So we can go into defenseman now.
Let's go into defenseman.
I think I have one pick in my defenseman I think people are going to get angry about, but we'll see.
I have one too. And it's my first one. And I don't mean to pick on Colorado, but Cale Makar.
Oh, I've got him too.
24 overall. I'm pulling up his stats from last year real quick here because, again, I just
Roman Josi.
Cale Makar in our league. Okay.
He had an extremely good season,
of course. But here's the thing. He had an extremely good season for points leagues. That's it.
Yep.
Yahoo Standard Leagues is not a points league, my friends. It is a lot of categories. You know where he finished in our league with pims and blocks? 175th. Remove pims and blocks, and he's more around 100. That's
He did miss some. He did miss some time,
that's
but
fine.
still.
That's fair. Okay, agreed. Nonetheless, my point stands that he doesn't shoot enough for me to be all that interested. He doesn't hit that much. So what does he have to offer aside from assists and power play points? There really isn't much there.
Yeah,
That's it.
Points.
So like if you are in a points league that values those two, cool. This list is not
Even then, 24 is really.
24 is
I mean, I get
ridiculous.
you're looking at value over replacement there, but a little
okay.
gambly.
But value over replacement. Let's take a look just real quick. I want to see the defensemen that are going around him. Okay.
Yeah.
You've got Victor Hedman, John Carlson, then Cale Makar, then you've got Roman Josi, Quinn Hughes, Dougie Hamilton, Pietrangelo, and Riley, Brent Burns, Torrey Krug. I'd rather have Torrey Krug later if you're going for a points defenseman. I'd rather have Erik Karlsson later. Like Chris Letang is going
I actually
72.6.
prefer. I think I might
Dougie Hamilton.
prefer Quinn Hughes to Cale Makar this season because of how leaky I think that Canadian division is going to be.
I mean, I don't see Cale Makar being worth that 23.9. When you look at a guy like John Carlson, he offers you a hell of a lot more than just his points. And that's what makes him so valuable in these leagues. Whereas Cale Makar, especially in a standard league, just no. I can't justify it. When you're at that position, and sure, you've just gotten a points defenseman, congratulations. But guess what? The fact of the matter is you can get a better forward there for your value. Value over replacement from
you want to hear an extremely hot take?
Whatever.
An extremely hot take for me would be if you're playing in a Cats league and you take Cale Makar in the second round in a 12-person league, I think your odds of winning the league have gone down significantly.
I wouldn't disagree.
Like it's not just like a bust. It's like your team is in trouble now if you're playing in a Cats league because you really need to be able to, especially if you have blocks.
Yeah.
If you have blocks, this is
Bad news.
straight up dangerous because you need to be able to have your defensemen fill out certain categories for you, specifically hits and blocks, and you don't want them to be lampooning, great word for that, your shot totals. Cale Makar does all three. You can get your points from forwards. You don't need to get those from defensemen. So if you're in a points league where goals and assists and power play points are like really heavily valued, maybe you can find this value. Yeah. I just don't know. I wouldn't do it in basically any league. It doesn't seem worth it.
It doesn't. It doesn't seem worth it to me. And it goes back to the thing of risk, right? Like I don't like that risk. I don't. I get there. Yep. There's people want to touch Colorado. There's a lot of name value there. It's exciting, but no, it just doesn't make sense. And I know some people might disagree with us and be like, oh, well, value for replacement. It's hard to find power play defensemen. Sure, I agree with you, but
not that early though.
But Dougie Hamilton,
they're all available except for
Dougie Hamilton's behind him. Roman Josi's behind him. You've got Morgan Riley behind him. You've got Brent Burns. You've got Torrey Krug. You've got all these defensemen. Rasmus Dahlin is back there, who's a top power play guy, and essentially what
Quinn Hughes
Cale Makar
is going to be an extremely similar player at the very least this season, and he's going 2 rounds later. Yeah. So
it's just nuts to me.
2 rounds later, not 2 picks.
No, rounds.
So.
It's nuts to me. And you've even got a guy like Neil Pionk. Like there's so many options there. To me, Cale Makar at 24 in anything but a points league or a very heavy points league is a waste.
You have to be points only for me. It would have to be goals assists only.
It is
for me to even consider it.
Straight up, in my opinion, a waste. Not to mention the goals also become harder to find later on in the draft. You know where goal scorers go? They go in the first 2 rounds normally. So usually. So
except for Mike Hoffman.
For Hoffman and except for like Marchessault. So
yeah,
I guess
Max Pacioretty
and Pacioretty.
Okay,
next.
I'll take my next one. And this is a player that I've had a lot of, I wouldn't say arguments, but I've debated with a lot of people about, and that's Alex Pietrangelo at 53.1. I wrote borderline next to him because he has value.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say he's like a bad defenseman, but if you're taking him at 53.0, according to ADP, that is the 7th defenseman off the board. He goes ahead of guys like Morgan Riley and Brent Burns, Erik Karlsson and Dahlin and a bunch of other upside guys. So what are you getting if you're taking Pietrangelo? The good things you're getting are probably high shot totals. He's really been shooting quite a bit, 3 shots a game or more lately, but he's moving teams. I don't know if he's going to be playing 24, 25 minutes on Vegas. We have no idea what his deployment is really going to look like. I mean, obviously, I would assume that he'll be, on the first defensive pairing. That doesn't mean they have to play him 25 minutes a game. If he's not playing 25 minutes a game, all of his peripherals will go down. His shots will go down. His blocks will go down to some extent. The biggest concern I have with him is he's a great point scoring defenseman. He's one of the rare defensemen that can put up pretty good point totals without totally relying on the power play. But he did use the power play to get to his good point totals last season at 52 and 70. Those are great numbers. You know who else got great numbers? Shea Theodore. he had pretty much the same pacing on the Vegas Golden Knights, and he was playing power play one and doing a great job of leading entries and his zone entrance for them on the power play was very key. So you're basically gonna have to convince me that they're either going to split the power play, which I don't see why they would because they have enough talent to just load up a first one, or they're going to replace Theodore with Pietrangelo at times, and I don't see why they would do that either. With the amount of space and creativity and offensive zone time that Theodore was giving their power play unit by driving the action. So yes, it could happen. And honestly, Pietrangelo moving over makes me a little bit nervous for Theodore because it could happen. But Theodore's going in the 80s and Pietrangelo's going in the 50s. I think realistically they should both be going right around the same area. With Theodore having a little bit more points upside and about the same shots, and Pietrangelo having more block upside. But again, in standard Yahoo leagues, you're not even thinking about blocks. So the ADP is basically going off of no blocks, which means they're effectively the same player. So why are they so different?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I would say is, one, obviously the risk thing we always talk about. But on top of that, I think you make a really good point of the fact that when you have two guys like Pietrangelo and Theodore, and a shortened season with a lot of back-to-backs and a difficult season, you're probably going to want to limit minutes a little bit. I don't think you're going to want to have necessarily a defenseman that minute crunches when you don't need to have one that minute crunches. So I think that, yeah, I could see a lot of kind of time limiting coming from the side of the Vegas Golden Knights in terms of Pietrangelo. Okay, my next one here. We talk about this guy every year, and I don't understand why he's still on this list. Zach Werenski. 68.4.
Yep.
Why?
Yeah, on my list too.
Why are people still taking him? What league is he valuable in?
I feel like he should be in the glut of defensemen that are all in like the 120 to 140 area.
Understand.
There's like tons of defensemen that always fall in that area, and that's kind of where he belongs.
Why? He's going above Erik Karlsson, Chris Letang, Darlene.
Why is he going above Chris Letang? What is
Tyson
happening?
Barrie, Shea Weber, Neil Pionk. Like, why? What?
There's nothing redeeming about his numbers or anything. I mean,
It's been
he had a
years
good
now
season, but
since
not fantastic or
It's
anything.
been years now since Werenski has really shown this possibility to be like a top defenseman. I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense. Sure, he shot pretty well last season. He was at about 3 shots a game. Fine.
Yep.
But I don't understand it. This happens every year. Every year we talk about Werenski being way too high. And every year he ends up right there again. So I would say just literally ignore him. Like, to me, Werenski is a guy you can pretty much ignore. Especially with the fact that, Seth Jones is on the team too. Both of them share the limelight. Reminds me a little bit of
And the
Pietrangelo
Columbus
Theodore.
power play has been like the worst ever forever.
Yeah, it is
for some
terrible.
Reason, so that's not helping.
There's just not anything there. I don't. That's all I have to say is it makes no sense.
All right, I've got one more defenseman. He's actually pretty far down there, and that's Adam Fox at 114.1. There's a lot to. I mean, we can go right back to the fact that that I think that division is going to be very difficult to score goals in to begin with. But again, take a look at like who's surrounding him here. You see Thomas Chabot at 108.5 right next to him. Charlie McAvoy on our sleepers list at 109.6. We've got Mark Giordano at 107.7. We've got Ivan Provorov at 101.0, who could be very good. Just behind him, we've got Keith Yandel at 115.9, who's a power play specialist. You've got Jeff Petrie, who does it all at 116.1. Mikhail Sergachev, who has the possible power play 1 upside if they do that at 123.2, who I also actually wouldn't take. But Drew Doughty at 131.9, who's being faded for some reason. We've got upside and Ryan Pulock at 133.5. There's a lot of options around him, to say the very least. So I don't I don't understand. He seems like I get why you might want him on your team as a late round gamble. I wouldn't take him in the mid rounds like this. He had a pretty good season last season. He got some power play points. Peripherals are nothing to speak of. His shots are less than 2 a game. So he really needs to be able to change his game significantly coming into this new season to be worth it. I guess maybe his plus minus is driving this, but
Don't draft with plus minus.
I would be suspect about that staying as good as it's going to be.
That too. Yeah, I mean, I guess the only upside is that the people are hoping that Tony D'Angelo loses his top power play spot and Adam Fox takes that over. I see that. I understand that. But yeah.
Or Truba, or they have options. It doesn't have to be Fox, even if he does lose.
But like Brandon said, it's just not worth it because he doesn't really offer anything else. At least in those mid rounds, there's so many better defensemen. Another guy that
if I was going to take him, he'd be my 5th defenseman probably.
Yeah, he'd be a bench
maybe
defenseman.
4th.
Like a gamble. You see what happens in preseason. Maybe he gets that top spot over D'Angelo. You don't know.
But this is when I see 114-1, I'm thinking that's on a lot of teams. That's a second defenseman, which is I don't know.
I don't like that.
I'm not behind it.
Another guy that I really don't like here is John Klingberg at 81.6. This is my last bust on defense. The reason I don't like Klingberg is a few. One, last year he lost a spot. He was terrible for long stretches, so wildly inconsistent. He was a waiver wire candidate for a good 3/4 of the season. He's got Heiskanen right on his coattails. They tend to split every once in a while. On top of that, Dallas is looking a little bit like an Arizona that doesn't score a lot of goals because they don't really need to. And so you pile that all on, and it's just a terrible situation for John Klingberg. And I feel like this is 2 seasons in a row now where we're saying the same thing, and that, man, this sucks for John Klingberg. I think last year it was I think his ADP was more like 50s last year, and there was a hope for a rebound. And he's gone down to 81.6. Clearly still a little bit of hope there. But when you see a guy like Jamie Benn going 140, it tells you a lot, I think, about what kind of a scoring potential the team has. If a guy like...
And no Sagan as well.
Yeah, if Ben and Sagan are going that late, it's because you're looking at a team that people are not confident in to score points. And if you're not confident in...
Well, Sagan's not even going to be there until April. So that also is going to affect his scoring.
So if there's no forwards going high that are going to score points that are worth it, why is a defenseman going so high? You need
a pass first
defenseman at that. Yeah, you're right. So why? I don't see it. And I don't like Heiskanen either just because of that split time. They switch a lot during the season. It's already a team that doesn't score a lot of points. Around that area, like I named off some of the people around Werenski too, there's a lot of people I like more than John Klingberg before and after that I'd take in a heartbeat over him. I like Thomas Chabot over him. I like, I maybe like PK Subban over him. No, that's too far. That's too far. But
that's
probably too far. But I do like Darlene. I do like Drew Doughty. I like these other guys that offer more as well when John Klingberg literally only offers you points. He doesn't shoot the puck. He doesn't block. He doesn't hit. What does he do? Except points. And if there's no points to be had, well, now you're looking at an undraftable guy. And quite frankly, I could see a situation where John Klingberg is essentially undraftable this season. I could see it happen. He was that last season. I don't think it's that out of the realm of possibility that we see it happen again.
All right, moving into goalies then. I'm going to take 2 because they're on the same team. Robin Leonard at 34.8 and Marc-Andre Fleury at 61.2.
They make the most sense.
The fact that they're both this high up, it should be raising red flags immediately. If I don't think somebody's going to be a guaranteed goalie 1, I'm not drafting them high. And both of those numbers are high.
Yeah.
Marc-Andre Fleury at 61.2. That's a 7th round pick in a 10-person. It's a 6th round pick rather on a, wait, is it? Yeah. 6th round pick in a 12. So it's early 6th actually. So Marc-Andre Fleury is a really weird one, I think. We saw Leonard kind of get the reins, and I kind of expect it to stay that way, although I think they will go a little bit hot hand, and it'll be a little bit of a 1A, 1B. But I want to make sure that my first goalie, if I'm going to take one early anyway, gets volume. Yeah. If I'm going to wait, or rather if I want to get a tandem or, a 1A, 1B situation, I can get Varlamov at the end of the draft, or I can get Saros way later. I can get, and I know that it's not exactly apples to apples to compare Nashville and Vegas here, but there's just options later that, if you really wanted to tandem Vegas, you'd lose the rest of the draft unless it's like a goalie specific draft and all that matters is save percentage goal against average and wins. So I think both of those are suspect that high.
To me, Leonard is okay. I wouldn't do it I fully understand why some people are doing it, and I actually don't fault people for doing it. I mean, he's shown us what he can do. He's probably, in my opinion, the number one guy in Vegas. I think at this point you can point to Robin Lehner being the guy. So to me, the most egregious one, the one that was on my list, was Marc-Andre Fleury. I don't think you should be touching him with a 10-foot pole at that ADP if you listen to this podcast. Nowhere. He didn't even have a good season last year to begin with. So didn't really have that great of a season, especially the playoffs. Didn't have a great time. And he's going 61.3. And he doesn't seem to have...
He's got Darcy Kemper behind him.
Why? If you want a goalie that you're not even sure is going to start, just grab Darcy Kemper and you just hope he stays healthy. I don't understand it. I don't really get the Marc-Andre Fleury one. Leonard, I kind of get. I would take him a little bit later. I agree with you, but nonetheless, I understand why people are doing it, and I don't.
I think we talked on our sleepers episode quite a bit about the value and depth goalies this season. So, there's like 3 or 4 goalies I like early, and Leonard's not one of them actually. But I get that he has more value than some of the guys you're going to get later, and I just. The only way I'm taking Leonard is if he falls to me in like the 5th round or 6th round, maybe.
That's the only place. And he ends up being like my first goalie or something that I take, and he just happens to be there. But nonetheless, I think you can get Binnington a little bit later. There's a few guys
Carter Hart is going after him.
Carter Hart is going after him.
I'd have above him, I think.
There's quite a few people that are going after him that I like more. Now, here's a guy that maybe I want to. So I wrote this before a big piece of news came out. And so I want to make sure that I have the right ADP for him before I tell you who it is. Okay, he went up a little bit. So my first guy here, or my only guy, because I also had Fleury, and those are the only 2 goalies really that stood out to me, is Ilya Samsonov at 48.8. So why do I have Samsonov here at 48.8 when you've got guys like Carey Price, Frederik Andersen going after him, Tristan Jarry going after him? You've got Jacob Markstrom going after him. Holtby, Kemper, Bishop, Saros, all these guys, right? I don't know if I trust Holtby, but still, better option. The thing with Samsonov that I don't like is that Washington in the past few years has not proven to be a good goalie system. It has been really difficult for virtually any goalie that's come into the net, whether that's Holtby or Grubauer. Grubauer actually did pretty well during one of his stints where he stole the net from Holtby. But when you look at kind of the danger zones and what Washington tends to give up, they tend to let in a lot of high danger opportunities. They play quite a pressing game, which allows dangerous opportunities the other way. And so it makes the goaltender's job really difficult. So when you look at a guy like Samsonov, yes, he's got volume. Cool. He's on a good team that's probably going to get wins. Where I see things suffering is I could see things start to break down in the save percentage and goals against average area, where Washington can score enough goals to live with an okay goals against average like they have with Holtby and an okay save percentage like they did with Holtby, and you'll get the wins, but you're also not going to get the saves because they don't let up that many shots. But the ones they do tend to be difficult. And so to me, a guy like Samsonov is a big risk. On top of that, you now don't have a trusted backup like Henrik Lundqvist, who can help train him and also take off a load when he's struggling. Can Samsonov take on a big season like this? I don't know. There's a lot of question marks to me when you've got guys behind him that could do better. So, to me, just Samsonov at 48.8, I'd rather take a forward or defenseman at that spot. When I look back at my mock draft, around that same spot is where I took Jordan Binnington. And even I didn't like Jordan Binnington at that point. And it wasn't because I didn't like Jordan Binnington.
I don't like any goalie at that point. I just feel like goalies in general are busts.
Sure, but
except for like 5 of them.
I mean, it kind of makes sense if a goalie run is happening. But my point, it was more that it's not that I don't like the goalie at that spot. It doesn't matter who you put there, unless it's like a Vasilevsky or Hellebuck that fell there for some stupid reason, or Rask or whatever. Right. But otherwise, like, I would have much rather had a defenseman around that point or a forward. Just because when I got to the end of that mock draft, I realized, oh my gosh, there are so many good goalies here. So it doesn't make sense to me to risk so much in Samsonov that early when there are proven forwards and defensemen there. I mean, you're talking about, Yossi going around there sometimes, Dougie Hamilton falling down to there. Your good defensemen are there in that 48.8 range, right? I'd rather have that than Samsonov and get goalies later. That's just me, but to me, it doesn't make sense to put that much risk in a guy like Samsonov.
All right, I got one last one here,
It'll be.
and it's Igor
I knew
Shesterkin.
it.
It has to be.
Had to be.
39.8. It's way, way, way too high for the amount of risk that we're looking at with this Rangers team. we're basically reacting to Shesterkin's 12-game season, right? Like he hasn't played a ton of games in the NHL. Great, yes, they were very good. He won 10 of them. That's unrealistic, right? We're not going to see the Rangers win 10 of every 12 games. Yeah. We're going to see him come back down to earth, and we don't really know what earth is for him in the NHL yet. So, and he's got a pretty solid backup in Georgiev. I could see that getting closer to a split start than a true starting position for him. So now you're talking about what's probably going to be a losing team overall in a guy that's a split start on said losing team. I don't understand why he's going as a sixth goalie here. I get the upside, I get the hype, but it just feels too rich to me.
Yeah. I mean, as a Rangers fan that just adores Igor Shesterkin, and I think he is the future king in that net, as much as I love him, you've got to also factor in the fact that last year he didn't necessarily steal a net. Alexander Georgiev was still incredible. He still played really well and got a lot of starts. There's going to be a lot of back-to-backs. It's going to be a rough season.
Yep.
And Alexander Georgiev is the second to last goalie being taken right now. Hank is behind him. Georgiev is 184.2. That I don't understand either, to be honest, just because Georgiev is a great option. I think I could see him start a lot of games this season. Very easily could see more of like a 50-50 split or a 60-40 split. And at that point, you're looking at Shesterkin and saying, I mean, yeah, you're going to get a lot of saves, and you're going to get, I guess, hopefully a decent save percentage. But where are the wins? And I mean, you might not even have the save percentage. Georgiev had a fantastic season. His goals against average was 3. I don't think Shesterkin is that far off. I think he's probably, who knows, maybe he's the next coming of Hank and has just a Calder winning season. I can see it, but that'd be very tough to pin on him. And that's essentially what you're drafting right now. You're essentially drafting, hoping he has a Calder winning season, given the price that you're paying. And the team he's on,
floor's too low.
Yeah.
Always the key here.
I just don't see it. Yep.
I think that does it. I think we're done.
That does it. That is it
That's busts.
for the busts. So what is next on our radar here? So we're going to do division previews, walk you through every team, all the fantasy relevant players, and kind of give you somewhat our projections for them, what we think of them. We'll also kind of walk you through the youths at some point. That episode might need to be scrapped just depending on schedule and what we have going on top of, the season's right around the corner. And I know a lot of people have drafts. So, pay attention to our Discord and our Twitter. We want to do some live streams sometimes to answer some draft questions on the weekends. We'll also be doing some mock drafts, so pay attention to us on YouTube. But definitely, if you have any questions, hit us up on Twitter at Fantasy Hockey PD, or be sure to join our Discord. And other than that, thank you for listening. We will catch you next time.
Yep. Thanks for listening.